Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Nous allons procéder au prochain panel des données ouvertes à la gouvernance.
We're going to start the next panel from open data to open data governance. And so a discussion on the management of data at the Quebec government. We have three panelists with us today. I'm going to introduce them to you, and then I'm going to give them the floor. We have the Minister of Security and American Minister Josianne, and with and then with the since 2020 the function of Prime Minister in the Minister of Security and also the information, and he has a baccalaureate in master in business management at University of Security. Also has a in governance and technology of information, and it's
ou public, et ce, dans différents domaines comme les télécommunications,
telecommunications, and also and transport, and recently, and also in financial services, and transformation, environmental, and also to accompany the public administration in Quebec in the information area. We also have Josianne Marsan of the Center of Technology of Information, and also Josianne Marsan is a doyen in research and innovation at the Faculty of Science of the Administration of University Laval, where she also teaches in teaching organizational and also from the research center in technology of information and in business. And security and then after a few years as a program analyst in international, it is technology information as at Montreal, that innovation for the teaching and for the scientific research. Josianne, the professor, and in 2018. Besought to house research medals for national beaming of her scientific research, and also she has received two distinctions for the excellence of her teaching at the University Laval. Josianne is usually invited to speak in the media and to do some presentations and training at the request of organizations, also local corporation, International Institute of Business Analysis, Desjardins, Revenu Québec, and Action Santé. We also have dans le Caron d'administration publique. Dans le Caron is a precise research in exploitation of information resources at DENA, where he studies the impact of digital technology on the working of the state and public organizations under the angle of information. He's also a teacher to research at Carleton, and he's more of a Ciano, and he has all the interest of researching the evaluation of programs and the management of First Nation issues, and he also teaches public estimation and evaluation of programs and in research and in management, and he passed 30 years as a federal civil servant, and he has a master's in matrix and also a doctorate. So without further ado, I'm giving the floor. If you have a question, just write them in the chat box. And we'll answer your questions at the end. Thank you. I imagine that, I don't know if I'm going to start, Jonathan, Josianne? Okay, good, thank you. So, well, simply, I'm going to answer this first question that was asked, the governance of data. Is it a fundamental subject? Well, first of all, for the government, for the state, be it a provincial, federal, or municipal level, it is true that there is no government without information. And a lot of work has been done on this, be it for taxation, but also today, you can also to develop a public policy that align with what society wants. So there's some need for information on both sides to govern and to be governed. And so we'll talk about opening later, because it's also important for the citizen to have access to information, to be able to vote, but also to have access to programs, etc. So strategic, operational, it is at the same time we're talking as a government and being a governed. So this is the general context in which we are today. And of course, today things have changed, but in this context, information of any nature is important, and I will stress the distinction between the governance and management of data. But when we see what is written in literature, well, this distinction between data and information will dwindle bit by bit. And there's a message from the federal Treasury Secretary, and say we are getting closer and closer to we're matching data, but we're also matching documents, and there are some connections between the two. And I will also broach something that was elaborated in May of this year, that is talking about information governance. So it is important. This is important because it gathers all this information, data, etc., in the same set. To answer this question, also we have to look at the scientific perspective. Scientifically, so management has always been there, the administrative data has always been that, and I know this, but we're not using them. And so it was somewhere hidden in our systems that were paper-based, and we have very little access to this, and we didn't have this trove of information that could help us develop public policy that are forward-looking and very, very well and this information is now more accessible thanks to the technology of information, and this is a complement. This is a complement to traditional statistic approaches, because there are two things that are complementary, that are necessary, and so we're going to go get in surveys what we don't find in our administrative data. And also we have to recall that administrative data has a meaning that is a bit different from surveys, for example, and because I'm going to tell how it's important to have a good frame to choose and use those data. So from a scientific point of view, statistics gave us some tools and ways of getting the information. But today, before doing a survey, aren't we not going to use our administrative data? And how can we do this? How can we? What are the conditions to reach this? So we need good quality information. How we're going to analyze them properly? How are we going to mix them with statistics that have been gathered through surveys? So these are things that are very important when we're asking ourselves a question. Governance, the open governance of data. So we need tools that will allow us to use this wealth of information so that we can exploit them properly. So we have to make sure, from a scientific point of view, we need the data to be valid, because we did a lot of investigation for past 10 years, and this is one of the big issues that stemming from administration. People are telling us, we don't know, we have a lot of data, but all those data, are they quality data? Are they trustworthy, and can they be used? And so the validity of data and also the validity of methodology, because now we are stepping into AI, artificial intelligence, and so these are methods that are based on a certain quality, on a certain form of data. So it is important to always keep these elements in mind. So this is for the scientific point of view. Now, from the institutional and organizational point of view, that is very important and very central to the issue that we're asking ourselves today. Well, the observations are showing us in our studies that there are a lot of difficulties to use our data the way we would like to use them. For example, we did a lot of surveys in the municipalities, and what we have, it is first a problem of quality, because there are some costs associated with gathering of quality data. There are some competencies that are necessary. We know the figure garbage in, garbage out, and we know how to use our data. But however, can we believe that the people who will have access when we open them people know to use them properly? Another element that that emerge very, very frequently. A survey that we did across Canada on the lack of interoperability between the systems, and so we cannot use this system in an harmonious way because there are silos here and there. And then we have all the issue that emerged, the sensibility of information and also the potential interpretability of the information. What is the mean of those data? How will it be interpreted by people who perhaps do not know the methodology and what this data is there for? So these are questions that are very, very important in the institutional level, and the role of data. And so these are issues that emerge a lot in literature, and we are talking in a few weeks about it in the health data. So it is very, very important, and so we have to make sure that in this opening that there's a frame that will allow us to use this data properly. And the last point that I would like to raise, the representativity of those data. Very often this information is very rich, but what does it exactly represent? So that is an also important issue. So our governance and management difficulties and challenges. So we thought that the governance of data, this is a very, very, very delicate but important subject, because can we have a governance, a data governance and a computer governance and document and information governance? We're going to have to find a way to align together to talk about the governance when they are the highest level and methodology. So governance, for me, this is something that is very encompassing, and then you can match data and information. It's not quite clear, but I believe that what we're going to see in short order, ISO 143 that are propelling us to see things that way, to make sure that we have an encompassing view, an integral view between the various elements that will see to it that we're answering, that we're meeting the different challenges, ethics, security, and use information and data, all this together. Because I believe that one of the big challenges that we have to go in the opening governance of data, we have to put ourselves in a new way of thinking of information in upstream. This is not a data that is produced. We have to produce it. We have to think of it from the outset for the governments that is well thought of, so that you can match all these elements in a way to protect and secure and to do this in an ethical way. So we also need, in terms of a challenge, we need a political leadership and administrative leadership to create the good frame. And so we need laws, we need policies that stem from legislature, but we also mean administrative leadership to enact this. So this is what we tend to neglect. We have laws, but we also have to enact those laws. So it has to go from the top to bottom to the field, so that we can change our ways of working through strategies that will be produced by law. And so we are going to have, in a very difficult paragraph, and we're going to need governments that will be centralized and also decentralized management through ministers and organizations. But we need this government, central government, that will give the initial impetus, but then it will have to be taken in a decentralized setting. And we need instruments also. We need also expertise, because more it goes, and I was saying this at the beginning, when we go into this universe, we're going to answer competencies and the science of data. It's not only a few words, it is also strategies that will have to be enacted in the various ministries. So my conclusion on the opening as such, this opening that's fundamental, because we are talking from of a model of a directorial on a new model where the citizen is at the center, but here public value, and in the model of public value, this is a new way of thinking of public action. We share information, and we share the decision making. And so if the information does not circulate and it is not managed more collectively, it's going to be very, very difficult to have participation of citizenry and develop citizenship, and to use this information to get to reach all the potential that could be reached. And to do this, well, we will have to open ourselves, but also lose our simplify. We have to gain the confidence of people so that they can participate. And so our model will have to be transparent, quite open in the management of data and information and management of data, so that people can work with us and make all this acceptable from various stakeholders. So that is what I had to say. That's my introduction. Thank you. And thank you, the Caron. If we got government and what actions are we doing? In the last 2 years, the government has updated its legal instruments in order to act. So we are talking about Algeria, that is the law on governance and management of information resource. There has been some iterations that there was a very important in the summer of 2021 that had to do with data. And the other important event is the creation of a minister of cybersecurity and digital, and that is also a first in Canada. We're the first province in Canada to have a ministry that is devoted to cybersecurity and to the digital, because we believe that in Quebec, this is one of the big missions of the state, just as transportation or health or the other areas. So this is not only a sub thing, but it's a main thing now. And in the wake of this legal update that took place, we create new functions related to data. The government manages and uses data since the beginning of time. But in order to manage digital data, we had to reinforce a management around these governments. So we created a role at the government that covers the management of data in the public area. It's important to mention this because when the bill was studying, is that the government was attended to centralized data, but we are more in a model of a federalization of data. And I'll come back to it a bit later. Now, if we come to a role for each of the ministries, we created a role of a management, of a delegate, of a deputy management, and so the role, depending on the volume of the organizations in certain public organizations, it's the same person that accumulates both roles, but it's also possible to have them in other organizations for less about health. For example, there are two different people that are ascribed to this role, and the delegate becomes the person in charge to see to it in its ministry and in the organization that there is a good management of the data, and then we can also ensure its security and its mobility and its value, and also the opening and the transparency of the data. And so this is a new area, and I have to say this the interest of the government in government data doesn't date from yesterday. The government has been thinking it for quite a while, but now we had to harmonize the practices, and so to harmonize, streamline practices to make sure that in a world that is more and more integrated, in a world where the expectations of protection of data are increasing, have to be safeguarded against cyber threats. So we need to have this new function, but there's a lot of work that is ahead of us before reaching an optimal role in the protection of data. And in terms of open governance, this is also a subject. For example, I can give you an example. The government of the Quebec, since March 2021, we have a committee that will to compose of research centers and civil society. But it can sound very, very abstract, But so what does it exactly mean for the citizen? For example, what are we working at in the Quebec government? Well, in the management of data, one of the occasions or one of the difficulties is the issue will provide less information to the state, and we know it when we stay with government. We are always giving the same information through various forms. And one of the visions of the transformation, it is the notion, saying it once, or the citizen gives information once, that is then protected, accessible, and covered by the laws to make sure that the use that is made of it is only for the purposes for which the information was collected, and also in a notion of enlightened consent. And I also want to avoid also fanning out of the information in various data sets, and if that augments the broadside and increases the attack. So if we're talking about this, to have the information with various level of quality in various data sets is an obstacle to a real transformation of the where we can offer more proactive services to the citizens and to the companies. Now, in terms of what we're doing right now, if we're talking about reference data or open data, and also just data, also to define everything that are important. When we talk about information, when we talk about reference, we are thinking about data that is often, where are the acronyms, for example, of the public organization. We started a new legislature at the government. There are some organizations that have changed name, or there are some new public organizations, and so we have to reprogram everywhere this information. Well, it creates a lot of work and a risk of error, and so we should have some references where we would have a piloting table with all this information, and it is updated at one place, and then it is updated absolutely everywhere in the different systems of the state, and we can do a lot of savings there, and this creates savings for the taxpayer. That is an example. Also, social source of data, the same thing. We are thinking the information that we are always done, the name, the address, the email address, etc. We have the service Quebec, the Quebec service of address change. That's a new evolution, and we're going to have a service where I'm going to change my email address, my cell number only once, and then if I consent to it, I can receive communications from the government, and also advise right now it is very, very difficult because it is a maze right now. You have to go into it is a maze for the citizen to update his information. So we want that information has to do it only once. But there are also some other data that are open. There are things that are open. Let's talk about Address Quebec, for example. So the base official of Quebec, and it's a partnership with the municipal area. We have data for all the Quebec territory and the road network, etc. So this is an example of data source that can be used inside the state, that in civil society, and not everybody has to build its own database in silos. And so this brings us to the issue of the inventory of data. That is a main difficulty. There has been an explosion of data for the past few years. And also in personal data, we're talking about the forms and how can we reduce all those these databases in a reasoned way, not necessarily not in the notion of centralization, but to make sure that certain data are in the mission in such and such public organization. It has to be protected. It has to be in an inventory. There is some legal understanding for the mobility of this data, and this also allows us in a very, very practical way to reduce the costs of maintaining all these databases and servers. maintain some databases, and sometimes to contain the same information, but the quality can vary, because if one digital transformation, we're talking about AI, the fuel of AI, it's the data, but of course, data of poor quality data, well, you won't get very far in AI, and the citizen wants more and more government services that are proactive and simple. Well, if we have good quality data, well, that's good, but if it is poor quality data, well, then we're not going to be able to do the digital transformation and offer services that are becoming of the 21st century. Now, in terms of inventory of government digital data, we're starting something that is very large, and it has to be done in a strategic way. That means that we're gonna target the sources of data that are the most promising. And we're talking because in the year we're talking about the sale of public data is not allowed, but when talking about to target sources of data that will bring the most value, especially in a notion of opening of data. That is to say, a better inventory will allow us to target sources of data that are not open or that should be open. And I'm reminding you, we have Données Québec that we are very proud of. We have 1,300 sources of data. And if we compare to other provinces, there's still a lot of work to be done. In other provinces have more data. And so we believe that we have to work on this and to better know the data of all nature. It will allow us to streamline and improve quality, and allow us also to increase the sources of data. And so it requires some transparency. Now, how the society can benefit of this exercise? Well, by opening the data sets, and I will also saying that the augmentation of data of open data sources will have a positive impact on the request to information accesses, on accesses to information requests, and more there will be data sets that are open on all sorts of subjects. More will be in a mode by default, I'm going a new data source, and it is closed, and we're going to have to do exercise to open it. We want to, and we have to demonstrate why its data set should be closed also, and this will augment the number of opened, and also reduce in certain cases the requirement to ask to request data and allow the citizen or the civil society to go on the source of data to have an answer to those questions.
Of course, it requires a classification role, inventories, sensitive data, non-sensitive, less sensitive, and there's also a crossing of data where two sets of data that are not sensitive individually, the crossing of those data sets can be used to identify a person. So that really complicates our work. So we want to avoid those kind of situations where clever people reading open data that can deduce some sensitive information or private data. So that there's a risk. That's part of the reality right now, and we're juggling with that. But we believe with the right processes and good controls put in place, we are able to avoid those kind of risks. So it's really to give access to a civil society that will make a difference, but also have a government that knows better its data heritage, and that will improve decision making at the state level, transition to digital era, and offer better digital services at the government level for the benefit of everyone. That's about what I had to share today. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Caron. On my side, I represent the CERTEC, which is a research center on information technology and business, and we've led a research for the MCN in Quebec entitled Disseminating the Standards of Interoperability, avoiding constraints, and at the middle level, Professor Caron was talking about it. Before sharing the main findings of this study, there's a few notions to understand that. What is a meta organization? It is an organization whose members are our organization instead of being individuals. So the term of meta organization regroups industrial groups. Those organizations are present daily, but scientific research really doesn't tackle them. For example, in the science of administration, I'm at the University Laval, and our evaluation of literature, we've observed that this is an issue that has been very less studied. That's why the CERTET is tackling and diving thoroughly in that there's an issue about bank sector that allows us to do some bank wiring at the international level. There's also UN agencies or European agencies. There are some meta organizations, intergovernmental organizations. So what is interoperability? Means it's about two systems that are able to exchange between mutually without human intervention. Of course, there's a human intervention to program and set up those systems, but afterwards, those systems can work without us and talk to each other. So interoperability allows us to create business networks and create organizations that are more efficient, and we experience that every day about interoperability. I go at flight, for example. It works with airplane companies to organize a trip, for example, using different airline companies or Amazon, how they use interoperable systems in order to go through a system and to reach a provider without having to go directly to that provider, but using a joint system. So why those meta organizations are important in the context of interoperability? So the interoperability doesn't come from the sky. It really needs to be programmed. It's when a group of organizations agree on a set of standards, data format, open data, notably exchange of data, and more importantly, they need to adopt those standards at the same time, at once, simultaneously. So, of course, all partners need to invest in guaranteeing that their data become interoperable. They need to do it at once, at the same time. For example, if you buy some sunglasses or 3D glasses to hold your business meetings, but when everyone is still on Zoom or locally on site in their offices. So organizations need to organize collectively, even though they don't have a hierarchical relation between them. So the principles of interoperability, first, when there's a dominant organization, a specific sector, can be transnational, could be Amazon, could be Google, which are powerful organization to standardize. The state also is a dominant organization. It intervenes in order to guarantee that the health systems are interoperable. So when there's no dominant organization, there's the data organizations are key to establish interoperability between different organizations, between their members. So we're talking here about an organization of standardization like SWIFT that we talked about earlier, but also the International Organization of Standards, ISO, or also the World Wide Web Consortium. it happens also that meta organizations that were not initially established in order to produce standards are brought to take on their agenda, or operability projects. It's not all organizations that do have to take a meta or operability strategy. That really was a subject of our memoir at the assembly to identify what's the context, the best, and it depends on their members, but also different governmental support actions, interventions. We can ask ourselves how an organization can apply principles of open government. One of the principles seems to offer a framework of interaction between organizations. It's the principle of organization between government actors and civil society. Indeed, meta organizations situate themselves in between those two entities, will allow civil society actors to have a voice towards government, also governments to have an interlocutor to be able to coordinate all sectors. A metadata organization contributes to the dissemination of rules and procedures between organizations. The government, in coordination with those metadata organizations, can conceive public policies that can be easily shared and disseminated. We can also reverse the question how governments can help metadata organizations conduct interoperability projects. Of course, governments have an incidence organization in order for them to implement interoperability strategy. We're talking about constraining context, communication, training, or funding. Mr. Kelly was talking about this. It also includes specific action to favor the adoption of standards. Ruling, for example, can implement a specific data set for organization, can launch trainings for an organization whose mission is to disseminate the standards of interoperability. It can also induce governments that are to act towards organizations that can be stimulate specific strategies of interoperability. The studies on innovation ecosystems really illustrates that. Indeed, an ecosystem of innovation, it's really based on the success of a public entity that will gather actors of innovation in a specific location, in a university, in an incubator, and put into place measures that will facilitate collaboration between those actors. Often, metadata organization will take the lead to coordinate all the organizations part of that process. A strategy observed in those ecosystem is identify standards of interoperability common in order to co-create commonly, mutually, in order to exploit in their respective innovation ventures. Can we also think about open governments when we think about interoperability based on open standards? Needs indeed governments and open data. Actors need to be able to build the standards that will adopt afterwards. And open governments guarantees that actors recognize the legitimacy of and the accuracy of those standards. That's the strength of all meta organizations. They create coordination forums where members will be invited to participate, to co-create, innovate around open projects. For example, interoperability data and projects. Those are three main findings can be taken out of our study on meta organization at the dissemination of interoperability standards. I do want to acknowledge Le Cousin, its leading professor that were on the field in order to lead that research, a review of the literature, existing literature, and also Louis led some interviews in field. So the first finding is that meta organizations are important at in the interoperability projects, and there's a study in Quebec being achieved on that front. Second, some actors have an incidents, positive or negative incidents on the success of interoperability projects, and the trend also to lead such a project can evolve over time. One organization that didn't want to get involved that much at the start can afterwards be more willing to do so. There's the people that really are interested in open standards, those that are not owned by a specific organization, not are held by organization of standardization that we were talking about the World Wide Web Consortium or ISO that are very well known about the production of standards. Many researchers have had observed that meta organizations that are non-technical at some point of their existence can be involved in interoperability projects. Those kind of organizations earlier were thought about as external organizations, but now they are more involved. So when we review the literature and our own empirical study in the field, we observed that meta-organizations were not isolated elements of the landscape in Quebec. They had the means to conduct strategic actions that favor production of standards. There are support processes, framework of collaboration, or even conduct training activities. Inversely, we observe interoperability projects that have no success because the leader organization doesn't see an interest in supporting it or is opposed to it. Those kind of negative actions are also important to take into account because it really allows us to have conscience about the weight of the meta organization in the success or failure of a project. There are many factors that have an incidence of the trend of meta organizations to lead interoperability projects, positive and negative factors. So an overview of factors, we classified those factors about the internal capacity, outside environment, or specific technique that they be submitted to. And then we observed how those factors are expressed in field. Sometimes we talk about theory and literature, and then we go on field to collect the data. And what we've gathered is that according to organization, the factors can be more important or less in the case in the context of environment or forest exploitation. Where there's a lot of presence of public interventions about factors like a funding program that can favor or discourage the conducting of a project. At times, there are more simple actions like a visionary fund that wants to support a digital project that can and its success and really brings it into venturing into a meta organization. So a unique factor can explain how a meta organization will lead interoperability project, even though an organization receives the full support of the government and they'll have all the means to conduct and transit to a change, but there's also there's a landing process management sometimes happen in at the organizational level on the field. So it's investments are needed towards members in order to adopt the proposed technology. So the last finding is that the trend of meta organization to lead and enter into interoperability project, it really depends on the factors of incidence that I just presented, because those factors can involve, for example, member organization of that meta organization will invest in technology and equipment. So obviously a meta project will gain more appropriateness. And so at times also the organization will access additional funding to bring a successful project. There's also uh, sometimes there are some voluntary will to engage in a project. Some organization will recruit experts, TI experts, IT experts, and also a community of practices between those IT people and organize network events. Those are key vectors of innovation. A community of technicians really can lead to the emergence of interoperability project. Because there's a networking being put in place. Our research at the empirical level that really uh, observed the success of many meta organizations which had no intention of uh, leading and developing interoperability projects were brought into being the leader of great and broad interoperability projects. They've been put into through spontaneously somehow into a very stimulating and also innovative projects. So when we focus on the meta organization and governments, we expose to the mechanism of at the heart of the process of change and success. We are able to explain in which conditions how we can disseminate standards of interoperability, and also can be quite useful for the MCN and the principle of open government that foresees collaboration between public actors and civil society. So it is important and useful to understand meta-organization in the process of transformation and the way they behave and the mechanism that allows them to evolve. The MCN can decide to support or put in place a meta-organization in order to land those policies and guidelines. Thank you so much. I think we arrived to the Q&A period. Indeed, thank you so much for our three panelists for their presentation. If you have questions in the room, I invite you to go to the mic. We have a question from Simon Charette, who is Professor Caron, who has the frontier between information it tends to dissipate. Are we only talking about quantitative or also qualitative open data? So what really happens slowly in that universe is that we observed that there was the arrival of the 0-1, the digital era, so everything becomes data. Of course, there's a heritage archives that needs to be digitalized to bring it to that 0-1 universe. Eventually, we'll have quantitative and qualitative that and build that heritage, and that's what I'm forcing, and that's what people are requiring and requesting in order to harness all the information, because sometimes the data will be in the form of quantitative, but they are also qualitative. An address is not always numeric in the sense of a number or quantity. So that will get unified over time thanks to information technology. Of course, so we're meeting here in Zoom. We're all 0-1 people. We are always in the data universe. We're tending to that. There will be harmonization, unification. There will be a gain that goes in the same direction of my fellow panelists. They are metadata that will be brought together in order at the level of archive management, data management, in order to look and find what we need in order to take decisions at the level of policies and programs and so on. There's no additional questions. I want to thank you, all the panelists, Mr. Kelly, Caron, Marsan, and thank you so much. We'll see you in the near future. Thank you.